well, I'll take up some of the themes that Chi has been talking about. In particular, this kind of ladder or steps of China art being even better than Western art. But then down the steps comes somewhere tumbling down is like Hong Kong art. Oh God, it's like 4 steps down. And then, hey, even Hong Kong can feel a little bit superior because then there's Macau art. It's like this at the bottom. This is kind of league table where everyone can win. Even Macau, because they can look at Zhuhai and so on. And so presumably it just goes back and back into that. And I wanted to take issue with that a little bit. And I wanted to take issue with that in the form of a story, just an anecdote really, about a failed bus trip around the Pearl River Delta. This is so unexciting, I suppose, a failed bus trip around the Pearl River Delta, that I felt the need to structure it with huge conceptual framework, which I elaborated on my flight here, but I think really it's maybe better I just chat about things. The trip was an attempt to bring artists and designers and architects, including Chinese, from Hong Kong, and also a group of artists, architects and designers from Macau, and ones from Guangzhou, into some productive, interesting relationship around the Pearl River Delta, because that was the theme of the last, that is the second Guangzhou Triennial, which was called Beyond. And if anyone is feeling that my title, Beyond, is unfeasibly poetic, or just trivial and trendy, it really was about going beyond this particular event called Beyond. The difficulties that we've encountered along the way in terms of transport and borders and passports and so on is maybe, in retrospect, positive, because really what I want to get away from is this idea of conglomerate culture of Hong Kong, Macau, the Pearl River Delta, these new big themes. But it has to be said that it's difficult to conceptualize, and I choose the word carefully, conceptualize the Pearl River Delta now without seeing it as a conglomerate. It's got all the economic power of Hong Kong, Macau and Guangzhou, and all the factory and the teeming migrant boom towns and export processing zones and docks and transport infrastructure that crisscrosses this already very complicated waterway, which we call the Pearl River Delta, running down, of course, from Guangzhou through to Hong Kong and Macau. And it's already an economic and political imaginary. It's structured by organizations like CEPA, which is, I forget what.
Closer Economic Partnership Arrangement.
Yeah. It already has wonderful acronyms like CEPA, PRD, or PRD PLC, as the Pearl River Delta, the GPRD, which is the Greater Pearl River Delta, and even the bizarre, wait for it, GPPRDR, the Greater Pan-Pearl River Delta region, which unfeasibly manages to annex counties and provinces as far as Yunnan into this one imaginary. Because of the economic and political imaginary, there has followed the question of, does this region have a cultural imaginary? It's an awkward, largely contrived, but inescapable question. Now, in 2005, the curators, Holland Brewer and Hans-Ulrich Obrist, devised the second Guangzhou Triennial to address this theme of does the Pearl River Delta have a cultural imaginary, and they called it Beyond, an extraordinary space for experimentation and modernization. I mean, all these wonderful titles. What they wanted to do was to visually chart what they called the imaginary of this conglomerate city region. Stress city region. I mean, these are all hyphenated, of course. And the strategy was to treat this conglomerate city region, I mean cities including Guangzhou, Hong Kong, and everything in between, as a laboratory, I'm quoting the words here, and for experimentation in art, much as, of course, this region was a laboratory for Chinese neoliberalism, in a way, and in a very direct parallel with neoliberal economic and political organizations everywhere from Chile through to America and Britain and so on. The curators, Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Johann Rohr, and also the architect Rem Koolhaas, had all collaborated earlier in a series of exhibitions called Cities on the Move, which some people may know, and which was very exciting as it rolled around Europe. Looked rather less exciting when it actually came back to Asia, because it wasn't so exciting anymore. Now, this trio, who developed Cities on the Move, now focused on Guangzhou, which is a city, in the English phrase, on the make. And now, my reflections on this failed bus journey around the Pearl River Delta are really about the very tail end, the very limp tail end of the opening events of the triennial. Of course, the triennial was anything but uncritical. It confronted the traditional view of Cantonese culture, the southern culture, as being pretty much beyond the pale. A challenge that Chinese talked about the cultural desert, and Hong Kong was very familiar with that. The curator's very ambitious idea was to turn this conglomerate city culture, to transmute this patchwork of factories and export processing zones and swollen migrant communities into the largest international Asian event of the year. Now, to do this, they set up a series of trendily named D-Labs, and that's the Delta Laboratory, which were just really discussion forum. And these D-Labs were to chart this extraordinary dynamism, the ad hoc post-planning, I'm all quoting this, and this makeshift lifestyles that, like contemporary Chinese art itself, had begun to stray beyond their expectations. Now, this was the reason why the second Guangzhou Triennial chose the title Beyond, and adopting the hyperbole of business portfolios and journalists. The publicity described the Delta itself as the site of the miraculous, the exceptional, the extraordinary. And its formal opening was staged under Yang Jieqiang's enormous flag, which is a magnificently huge flag, which was of the Pearl River Delta as a country. Now, remember that the conceptualization of the PRD has been very much from an economic perspective, and one reads many books about the Pearl River Delta to say, if this was a country, it would have a GDP equivalent to Australia, or it would have an average income equivalent to this. So Yang Jieqiang took this line that, hey, let's declare independence. And the flag is a kind of fairly muddy river, This is the flag. And underneath it carries the motto, deliberately badly written. We can do almost anything really well, except speak Mandarin. Now, the helicopters were circling around, the luminaries from Beijing had arrived, and everyone thought, what a good joke. There was no sense that this was treated as splitism, regionalism, politically dangerous thing. This was art. Hey, this is cool. And so we can do everything really well. It was also an unashamedly commercial event where art traded with real estate and commerce. Now this too was all familiar territory to Hong Kong and Macau. We've also traded with developers, and Chan-Chi was talking about the Osage Gallery. We've also been involved with touristic spectacle. Artists in Macau gathered together for the UNESCO bid for culture. Hong Kong artists being presented as the public face of Hong Kong. And artists both in Hong Kong, Macau, and in Guangzhou have managed sometimes to wrest an unlikely poetry from behind the scenes of these constructed facades. So it seemed to me that artists in Hong Kong and Macau would be interested in getting involved with the triennial. And I set about trying to invite everyone and to share perspectives across the delta from the three vertexes, if that's the right word for triangle, vertices, to share perceptions across the delta's dwindling political borders. Surely everyone would be interested in that. No, they weren't. No one was interested. It was my naive motivation, of course, for the organization of this meandering cross-border event for the opening exhibition, which I called Trading Places. So in the end, 50 artists, writers, commentators, architects, designers were assembled for a series of these exchange visits, except that things went wrong from the very beginning. The Macau people cannot enter directly. China, they had to go via Hong Kong. I'll get onto some of the problems later on. Now, there was something else. Publicity for the triennial had talked about this conglomerate city culture. And it had described the idea of the Pearl River Delta, which it said ran from Hong Kong to Macau to Guangzhou and everything in between, as the site of beyond. This was the site of beyond. And the problem was that only one Hong Kong artist, Warren Leung, no Macau artists had been invited to the show. And somehow it seemed Hong Kong and Macau were beyond, if you see what I mean. Though the exhibit designer was from Hong Kong, except that they're really from Paris. So there's a problem there. Now, plainly, these cities, Hong Kong and Macau, were peripheral to the Pearl River Delta. That doesn't seem to square with their economic and political structure, but culturally, they were. I think I can understand something of this, that compared to the glamour that Beijing or Shanghai has, the Pearl River Delta is certainly less glamorous and has been overlooked for some time. And for some, it seems quite reasonable that it too should have its 15 minutes of fame on the world stage. rescuing then the Pearl River Delta from obscurity was partly the aim of the event, but it was to mobilize this area of Chinese art for the international market. It was quite specifically for that role. When we asked, well, why didn't you get some Macau people, one of the organizers, and this was Holland Rowe, I suppose we can say all these things now, said, have you ever tried phoning artists in Macau? And he was talking about it like it was Albania or somewhere. He was like, how could you possibly contact these people? So, to many people in Hong Kong and Macau, this exclusion from the zone of the beyond, being beyond, followed hard on the loss of manufacturing, the loss of political autonomy, even under the special economic zone regions, and the handover. Certainly in Hong Kong, jokes about mainlanders have become almost unacceptably cruel in Hong Kong ever since '97. And the SARS epidemic, we were talking about that earlier, had made Hong Kong almost into a cordon sanitaire against the mainland. And of course, the 1st of July demonstrations that toppled the Linois administration, people had learned to create this new political space. And in a moment of nostalgic resurgence, of optimism, one administrator in Hong Kong said to me, trying to convince me, this was Lewis, by the way, this is ridiculous having the Guangzhou Triennial in Guangzhou. We should have it here in Hong Kong. It seemed to be quite an odd notion. It also seemed as if history was repeating itself. The first Guangzhou Triennial had really not encouraged any Hong Kong participation. And it had showcased, a decade of Chinese art, quite specifically. I think, too, one of the things that this revealed was that sensibilities, cultural and artistic, in the different areas of the Delta were quite distinct. And trying to talked a little bit, or hinted a little bit, at the quality that Hong Kong artists have of not being very clubby, and certainly not wanting to work under the banner of a rather ambitious curator. And I think most Hong Kong artists would run a mile from this kind of work. Portentous themes like beyond an extraordinary space just make a lot of Hong Kong artists cringe. So from the start then, there was a slight edge to the bus journey around the Pearl River Delta. Macau artists were actually the most relaxed because they had been so used, they were inured to being dumped on by their government, and they had actually gathered together for the UNESCO event, and their prize for that was to lose the old ladies' house, their working space. For Hong Kong artists, most of whose careers were forged in the I suppose, the post-colonial era, their offer was an unbuilt or half-built complex, the CBE complex, where they were allowed, under the wonderful heading of self-organization, to put up little displays, but it was very peripheral, and it was miles away from the main center of the triennial, which is in the Guangdong Museum of Art. And it took quite a lot of effort then to bring people together. And when we came, I think most of the artists from Hong Kong and Macau did feel a little like a slap in the face. Yeah, you can be part of the triennial, but there's some building somewhere in the river, and yeah, just put something up there. We'll take a bus there, maybe. We were also surprised at some of the events. There was the so-called dynamic vision of the Pearl River Delta in a globalized era of art production. This event took place at the Times Museum. Actually, the Times Museum is not quite the Times Museum. The Times Museum is the clubhouse, which is also the development office and sales office for a development in Berger, by Rem Koolhaas, except it's not really by Rem Koolhaas, it's just he's got his imprimatur stamped on it. So stamped on it, in fact, that as you drive for about a mile in any direction, there is just one word on the banners, which is Koolhaas, 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 as you come closer and closer. And underneath in Chinese it says, the first Dutch word that any Guangzhou child will learn is Koolhaas. You ride, and there's about a half dozen 19-story blocks. And the idea is how to turn this into a lifestyle. And last night we were walking around, is it Spring Street? Anyway, the one which is called Gallery Row?
Yeah, downtown.
Downtown area, yeah.
So-called arts district.
How you gentrify, how you create this ambience of middle-class lifestyle is that you have to have galleries. So you put up the word Gallery Row even before there are any galleries in there. The Times Museum then, the Times development was just a series of blocks. And Koolhaas had suggested that some of these could be used as artists' studios or artists' flats, which was immediately seized on as the way to present this. And the adverts ran, you know, when you put out the trash, you may bump into an artist. In fact, out of what, about 200 units, I mean, only 2 were for artists, and one doesn't really know how long that's going to take. And the whole development is called Deconstruction, which is an extraordinary title. And the Big Tail Elephant group were involved in this. And when we went, Hans-Ulrich Obrist was talking enthusiastically about Cedric Price's idea of post-planning, as if this was all this kind of wonderful mix of culture, development, art, money, and it was all fantastically ad hoc and post-planning, except that behind Obrist, through the windows, one could see the developers just opening up their little parasols and selling the units. And we could see that the relationship between art and commerce was in no way post-planning. It was extremely well organized and planned. Now, I'll rip through some of the satellite
You're going
events.
to have to rip really
Yes.
fast. Light speed.
Well, this is where things really start to go wrong, I suppose. The curator for the Guangdong Museum stood up and said, hey, we don't really need to go to Hong Kong, you know, just take your time, and they'll send another bus if they want to. So none of the Chinese artists came down to Hong Kong. The Macau people had to go home because they couldn't actually enter Hong Kong directly from China. Hans Ulrich had disappeared in the middle of the night because he was saying, I can't bear this, I have to go through 2 customs, and what is going on here? And simply said, walked out and got a most unfeasible taxi journey, just got into a taxi and said, take me to the airport, and disappeared in the middle of the night. And we went on a boat trip. I mean, the boat trip was for everyone, but it ended up with just 3 people representing the 3 cities. There was Yang Jiachang representing Guangzhou, but of course Yang Jiachang is French. I mean, he lives in Paris. There was me, I suppose, representing Hong Kong. And the Macau artist was Konstantin Besmerti, who comes from Moscow and has made his home. And so some of these questions that Caroline raised about emic and etic views of culture are quite interesting. Each group kept themselves to themselves. Even at the final party, there were little tables of architects from Macau or architects from Hong Kong. There were artists, there were groups from Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Macau, and they never really mixed. Now, this rhetoric of conglomerate, globalized culture it seemed crumbling as we were trying to assemble it. And of course it was crumbling worldwide. The whole rhetoric of globalization as increasing value and making everyone richer and happier was falling apart at the same time. The whole neoliberal model was beginning to fall apart. And it seemed that the more coercive these acronyms of GPRD and the more coercive the economic and political models were, the reality was that the regional artists, the regional cultures were quite well rooted, and that behind the facade of this, sort of the globalized era of art production, in fact, there were just various kinds of localisms, and that seemed, in retrospect and in hindsight, even after a failed bus journey, seemed very positive.
All right, terrific.